The question is, do images tell the truth? What is, if we can put it in more kind of technical terms, what is the epistemological value of images? Do images really offer up their content as easily as we think? And I think this really came into sharp focus for me in one of the most repulsive online debates, I'll confess, Waleed, I think I've ever seen. It goes something like this. Last week, in the aftermath of the terrible bloodshed on Westminster Bridge, there was a freelance photographer. His name was Jamie Lorman, who happened to be there. He snapped a couple of photos, professional photos. He wasn't an amateur photographer. He snapped a couple of photos of a victim lying on the ground being attended to. In a number of those photos, there was a young woman wearing a hijab who was walking past, phone in one hand, the other hand on her cheek. One of those photos in that series, and by my count there were at least 8, one of the photos in that series was then widely circulated. And suddenly, within a day of being circulated, it found itself, if you like, at the center of a social media firestorm with various people, most of them, I have to say, in the US, most of them saying, here we have a demonstration, here we have proof positive of the scant regard, the indifference, even the disdain that Muslims have for the victims of Khalid Masood.
The idea being that she looked uninterested, she looked unperturbed, was walking by as though she were walking through a meadow.
That's right. She was checking her social media feed instead of attending to the guy lying on the ground.
Which is a very interesting meta-commentary on the phenomenon that we're talking about here. But anyway.
Isn't it ever?
Yeah.
So then the mainstream media sites and newspapers picked it up. And then came the corrections and the clarifications and the retractions. And then that set loose a whole fresh wave. And with each wave that came, this image kept getting spread further and further and further abroad until this woman herself had to come out and explain something of the distress that she was feeling. Now, it seems to me, Waleed, that, the entire affair I found repulsive. It's an orgy of moral errors, I think. And it exemplifies in many respects everything that is worst about our social media saturated age.
But this begins with an over-reliance on the photograph for epistemological purposes. But I feel wrong even using the word epistemology here because it was really just rhetorical purposes. Yeah. It was really just polemical purposes. Here you had a predetermined narrative that needed to be fed, and the photograph in question just provided grist for that mill. It was as simple as that. There was no real epistemological commitment, if we're being completely honest. So it seems a bit strange to be talking about it in epistemological terms. Nonetheless, I'll proceed to do so because there is a broader problem here, and that is that, contrary to what Rod Stewart has to say, every picture doesn't tell you a story. It doesn't necessarily tell you very much at all. To the extent it's telling you a story, the story might be profoundly misleading because all it does is capture a moment. A series of pictures might tell you something a little bit more. Rolling vision might tell you something more still. Actually being there probably tells you most. But what I think became the problem here was not that there was an online spat about something ill-conceived. That surely is happening as we speak right now. Indeed, it may well be happening about us, for all we know, Scott. But it's that this somehow became a topic of public conversation, that the traditional media that is meant to have things like editorial standards, that's meant to apply some kind of seriously epistemological filter, that is meant to be providing a window onto the world such that we can understand it and try to discern what is true about it from what is not true or what is speculative or what is just plain false, that mechanism so completely failed because someone posted something on social media. I think it's hard for me to think of something that, certainly just in living memory or recent memory, that distills the catastrophe that is befalling traditional media at the moment.